Thank you. Cool. So how many of you do know who I am, either through the news or the media? Nobody. Okay, good. Well, except for you. You're smiling, so I don't know what you know. But all right. So how many know what a 0 day is to begin with? He does. You do. So half of you know what a 0 day is. How many people of you have written a 0 day before? Okay, so a few of you have, but not all of you. Okay, so before I go into actually the value of what a 0 day is and brokering and the sale of 0 days and things like that, I want to talk about what they are so we understand what it is that's being sold and why they're of value. So when anybody's building software, right, we make bugs. Nobody's perfect. Everybody has a flaw someplace in their code. Sometimes that flaw can be used to leverage the system or leverage access to the system. You can inject something into the memory of the system and you can take control of the flow of execution. All make sense so far, right? That's a 0 day vulnerability. As soon as that vulnerability is discovered, and nobody else knows that that vulnerability exists, it's a 0 day because nobody has any idea the vulnerability exists except for you. And so the fact that it's unknown also means that only you can use that specific vulnerability because you know about it, nobody else does, to potentially attack a system, right? An exploit is just a tool that leverages that vulnerability. It's a piece of software that is specifically written to access and manipulate the 0 day itself, right? The actual vulnerability itself. And I'm kind of skipping way ahead of this thing anyways. So the exploit is literally a piece of software. The exploit can do anything from launch calc.exe, which is what a lot of people will do just to kind of demonstrate the concept, right? Just prove that it's something that you can use to take control of a system with. Or the exploit can drop a shell, or the exploit can feed malware into a system. It all depends on how it's actually developed. The ethics of the exploit are determined by the user. They're not actually determined by the exploit, just like a gun doesn't have any ethics tied to it, despite the fact that it's a weapon. It can be used for good and bad, right? So exploits and 0 days and everything, they're dual use. Now, are you guys all with me so far? You guys have any questions about exploits and all that so far? Nobody? So how many of you think that 0 day exploits are particularly dangerous? So you guys do. And how many think that 0 day exploits are more dangerous than exploits that have been, or vulnerabilities and information that's actually been published already? You do. Okay. So, and this might be an interesting point of debate that we can talk about. So when I was looking at Verizon's data breach incident report from the 2015 that they published recently for the numbers, it showed that, I think it was someplace in my slides, 99.9% of all breaches were the product of known vulnerabilities that have been published for over a year being exploited, and less than 0.01% were the product of 0 day exploits actually being exploited. So I would argue actually that 0 days aren't as dangerous, in many respects, as exploits that have been, vulnerability information that's been published. I think the reason why full disclosure exists, or the reason why people like publishing vulnerabilities, is really because it makes them feel good. I think it's an emotional thing, right? If you're publishing something, you're allowing people to have the knowledge about this thing that you've identified, right? And by allowing them to have that knowledge, you're saying, hey, you can fix this issue if you want to. But if 99.99% of people are being compromised, well, then they're not patching, right? And how many of you guys actually manage and maintain your own networks and things like that? Or are you do? Do you patch everything as it comes out? Right. So, okay, let me actually pull into my slides then. Okay, so there's another interesting point about 0 days. It kind of ties in what we were talking about previously, right? They target one very specific type of thing. A lot of people equate 0 days to weapons, right? They'll look at a 0 day and they'll say, well, it's similar to a gun, or it's similar to a bullet. Water. But a gun or a bullet can be used for a lot of different things. It's not one very specific target. A 0-day is kind of like a bullet that was designed for a very specific kind of person or a very specific individual. 0-days don't always work, right? If you have a network that's configured in a strange way, sometimes the 0-day vulnerability itself doesn't actually align the 0-day exploit doesn't actually align with the vulnerability properly. There are other cases where, a system might actually have a strange circumstance, a memory that prevents a 0-day from firing. Oh. Do you have a remote clicker for this thing? Don't. Okay, well, here's an interesting one. And I like this a lot. So a lot of people were saying with the hacking team thing that happened that we'll get into for sure, they're saying, well, how can you possibly sell 0-days? The ethics of 0-days, and they question our ability to go and arm people and enable people to break in other people's computers. But in all reality, 0-days are far less dangerous than laptops, right? I mean, you can use laptop computer to do everything from write an endless number of 0-day exploits, right? You can use it to use known exploits, make up the 99.99% and compromise God knows who. You can use laptops to spread disinformation. There's an endless number of things that you can do with laptops, yet nobody really brings into question, why people are buying laptops and what they're doing with laptops. So the risks associated, I think, are blown far out of proportion. Does anybody disagree with this yet? Well, Stuxnet was also something that was very specific, right? So, I mean, if you look at Stuxnet was designed to do one very specific thing, and it was designed to do it fairly well, and it kind of achieved the goal. So I think Stuxnet was still not more dangerous than a laptop, not more dangerous than a computer, but it was probably dangerous because it actually had a physical response. And I think that that's something that we're going to start seeing more and more. I think we're going to start to see exploitation actually manifest itself in physical ways more and more, as opposed to just for informational purposes and things like that. No other questions so far? Come on, you guys are supposed to be interactive and ask me all kinds of questions about this, but nobody's, all right, I'll keep going. So now we can get into the fun stuff, and this is really who buys 0-days. So I'm sure that you've all read recently in the news. How many of you are familiar with the hacking team breach? None of you, sort of? Okay, so I'll bring up to speed on what hacking team was that I somehow expected everybody to know what hacking team was. Hacking team was a company located in Italy. They're kind of like Vupin. Are you familiar with Vupin at all? Okay, so hacking team is kind of like Vupin. Some of you know who Vupin is. They built a framework, and the framework was designed initially for law enforcement. And what they told us before we started working with them, which was a mistake, what they told us before we started working with them was that they would sell this technology to various law enforcement agencies, right? And this is where the ethics come into play. So the goal would be, if you're a law enforcement agency, you could target James, right? And you could say, hey, I want to watch everything that James is doing, and I want to get into his phone, I want to track his location and read his email. So they'd infect James with their technology, and they could track everything that James was doing. So we ended up working with them. We actually sold them a flash 0-day exploit, and the flash exploit was we called an ideal state 0-day. You basically go and you browse to a website. It was a website that this thing would be embedded in. And when you browse to the website, your computer was seamlessly and automatically compromised, right? And then whatever payload was in there, which would be in this case hacking team's payload, would tell your computer to either install their software or run a series of commands that were up to them or do whatever they actually wanted to do. So it was very useful from a law enforcement perspective. Unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, hacking team got hacked, right? And they got hacked by vigilante hackers. Now, if you actually go back and you look at the articles that we released on it, or the articles that have been written up, but I actually said that it was a blessing in disguise. The reason why it was a blessing in disguise is they promised us that they were working with friendly nations, and they promised us that they were working with law enforcement, right? But they weren't. They were selling to the FSB. They were selling to regimes that were known for human rights violations and all kinds of nefarious things, right? So the actor in this case, right, the people who had this technology were doing things that I think were quite questionable. And as a result of the whole hacking team thing, we actually ended up shutting down the program because one of the buyers we'd worked with since '99 were the ones that introduced us to them. They said, hey, you guys can work with this team, and we vouch for them. We say they're a bunch of good guys, and we've worked with them a lot, so why don't you go work with them? So we said, great. Well, a blessing in disguise, because when they were breached, right, we sold them a single flash 0-day. Our 0-day was exposed. And what happens when the 0-day is exposed? Right. Exactly. So it's no longer 0-day, and it's patched. Well, hopefully it patched in time. But people who would ideally want to use a 0-day, even if it's not patched, are generally not going to use it because now it's something that people can detect. So it loses its covert ability. But what's interesting here is with all the stuff from Eric Snowden and people being worried about the privacy and Prism and all the things they were doing, people with this hack and with the knowledge of people selling 0-days in this market, they get very confused. They think that a 0-day is being used to really infringe on their privacy. They think that 0-days are being used to hack everybody and to watch everybody. Now, anybody here have any idea how much a single flash 0-day might cost, dollar value wise? Let me take a guess. What is tens of thousands? Yes, but I mean, give me a more, because that's more. About 100, 110 for a single flash 0-day non-exclusive, right? Now, if a 0-day is useless effectively after the first time it's been fired because it's no longer 0-day, it's not really a viable thing to think, right? But if you're using it to do mass surveillance, it's going to be detected eventually, right? Because you're firing it how many times? Right. So there's better operational use. And the thing that is really, you'll see, I think you'll agree, is the service providers are a much easier way to get all this information, right? People put all their stuff out on Facebook and LinkedIn too, so everybody's sharing all of their information freely, right? And the service providers are openly giving all this information to the government. So the government really doesn't need to buy 0-day exploits to go and compromise your phones and monitor the citizens, right? Go ahead. Oh yeah. They can pick it up that way, but they have, and they still have. I have to believe they have all kinds of ways of collecting data directly from the providers too. If you look at what Verizon was doing, I don't remember how much data was actually provided by Verizon to the NSA, but it was something incredible, and it wasn't just Verizon. So if you think about it, right, the cost of a 0-day, the range is really anywhere from 50 up to maybe $500,000, depending on what you're doing for a single 0-day exploit. If you think about, the concern that people have with being spied on, you think about the value of a 0-day, and you think about this, yeah, your government's spying on you. We all know this, but they're not doing it with 0-days, right? 0-days have a very specific use. And a lot of people say, well, we don't want our government to have this capability because they're really afraid of what's going on with the spying and the monitoring and all this and that. Well, if you're worried about spying, the very first thing you have to do is stop using Facebook. And stop telling everybody all of your secrets. That's the very first thing. That drives me crazy because I see people talking about privacy, and then they go and tell people their life story on Facebook. So it doesn't really go that way. 0-days are used for very specific things. They're used for targets like the Stuxnet thing, right? Where people need to gain access to something that they can't otherwise get access to. And the value of a 0-day in the legitimate market anyways, is determined based on the operational need and the window of time in which it's needed, right? The value of a 0-day on the black market is determined by target distribution, right? So if you're selling 0-days, I guess that's not always 100% true, but generally it's true. If you're selling 0-days, or if you're a broker, or if you're a developer that has some time ago, or maybe now developing 0-days, and you're working with somebody, you can actually kind of tell where things are going based on value. If somebody's willing to pay, $50,000 one day for a flash exploit, then next year they're willing to pay $200,000, you can be sure who their buyers are for that specific reason. Now, how many of you think that 0 days can be used to do good? So, like, what would a good case be for a 0 day? Oh, you could, yeah. Oh, yeah, actually, it's that's. Yeah, they did. They did. I'd forgotten about that. They did something where they went after a big botnet. That was pretty cool. But I don't know if it was a 0 day or not. Might not be. You. Yep, that's one of the things that I always talk about. Yeah, 2013, the FBI busted a massive child pornography ring using a FireFox 0 day. And there are people out there that would say that there's absolutely no need for this kind of thing. Well, I think that's a pretty damn good need. And if this market didn't exist, the FBI wouldn't have had that specific capability, right? So there is need for this. The problem is it's the Wild West. And we can talk about regulations too and wassenaar in just a minute, which is a really interesting thing to talk about because of the impact that it could potentially have in the security industry as a whole. And I'm going way off the presentation with that, but that's okay. So um, 0 days are dual use. Actually, I'll kind of get into wassenaar now. So are you guys familiar with the Wassenaar Treaty? So the Wassenaar Treaty does a lot more than just 0 days. I suggest that you guys all get very familiar with it, especially if you have a security interest, because it has the ability to critically damage the security industry as a whole. When it comes down to 0 days, it's a really overreaching treaty that, if it becomes law, will really prevent the proliferation of information related to 0 days. In fact, it'll make it illegal in many cases to share information. One of the things that wassenaar will do is it will limit your ability to discuss any kind of vulnerability research that you're doing. So initially, when you're doing vulnerability research, right, the thing that you identify, the very first time you identify a vulnerability, it is a 0 day vulnerability. Well, if you can't share that information with people because of wassenaar, you've effectively been stifled, right? It's definitely worth looking up. I can actually write a blog entry on this so you guys can read the blog at some point. No, Wassanner, something like that. Yeah, the Wassenaar Treaty. Yeah, it went away. So, anyways, so the Wassenaar Treaty is an attempt by a lot of people to try to regulate the 0 day market, and it really does focus on 0 days. Some of the new aspects of it focus on 0 days, but it's so far-reaching that it would do something like prevent, if you have a multinational, have a company that's in multiple countries. Let's suppose that, I have an office here in Boston, and there's another office that's in Luxembourg, and I find out that my office in Luxembourg is compromised, and it's compromised in some unknown way, and I want to share that information with my office in Boston so I can get fast incident response. I can't do that with wassenaar in place without first getting a license to export that information. So it's ridiculous. The look on your face is exactly right. So if this goes into place, it's an attempt to try to regulate the 0 day market, which does need regulation, and I'll get into that in a second. But it's absolutely the wrong way to do it. Let's kind of work down towards the regulation ethics, and we'll go back into hacking team and other players. So who do you think should be responsible for the existence of 0 days? Who should be held accountable? The creators of the vulnerability? So the software, so the vendors. Right, I agree. And I think if you hold... Nope, not at all. Because take a look at Adobe. Yeah, but I mean, if you look at pharmaceutical companies, right? If they make a drug and the drug kills a lot of people, they're going to get sued. It depends. I mean, it's costing people. Right. I mean, it's not. But I still think that if you held Adobe, for example, right? Not that I want to get myself in trouble talking about Adobe in a bad way, but if you held Adobe responsible for some of the Flash vulnerabilities that existed, and there was a fine every time a specific vulnerability existed, and they had to pay that fine, I guarantee you there would be a lot less vulnerabilities in the software. There would be a lot less 0 days. What might not exist? It might not exist, right? So but that is one of the things that I think regulations have to start to look at, because right now, what regulations are trying to do is they're trying to control the researcher, and they're trying to actually control the product of the research, the information, right? If research is hindered, then I think that it's going to have a really bad impact on the security industry as a whole, especially for countries that are required to fall under that specific, regulation. Now imagine if wassenaar, and all the stuff that's in it right now, which I hope you guys will go read about, actually applied to the US, but it didn't apply to Russia. It didn't apply to China, right? All of a sudden, we've disarmed ourselves. We aren't able to do research. We aren't able to produce 0 days, right? Identify vulnerabilities, communicate about vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, these potential adversaries are able to do it freely. Iran recently passed a law, recently being maybe 2 years ago, because I'm terrible at time. They recently passed a law that effectively said that they would condone the hacking of anybody within the US from their country, and it's not illegal. They said you can go ahead and do that. So our adversaries are doing this, and we're sitting here trying to control and limit research. So I think regulation is an important thing, right? Now, going back into the hacking team thing, this is why I think regulations are an important thing. When we were doing these deals, we have very specific contracts that we sign with vendors. And the contracts, I guess it's like selling anything. If I sell you a computer, you can go and hack somebody, and I'm not going to be responsible, unless, of course, I knew that you were going to use that computer to hack somebody, right? But I'm not going to be held responsible for your hacking efforts, right? Now, they don't, and it's because it's not the 0 day itself, right? So 0 days are just software. Well, a 0 day exploit is just software. So you can't really apply a law. I guess you can, but I don't think you should really apply a law. Also gray. Yeah, it's a very gray zone. There are no laws, but here's the thing though, you don't want to put laws around the development and research of. You want to put laws around the use, right? Because if you put laws around the research, you're going to be stifling research, and you're going to be preventing people from finding flaws to help other people theoretically protect themselves, even though 99.99% of people are apparently not doing that. But the laws need to be focused more on the use. And that's one of the places where I think it's going to be different than, kinetic weapons. Kinetic weapons like, guns and stuff. I'm sure that you have to have licenses, and there's all kinds of rules around development and things. Yep. Sure. Good. That would be ideal, but that's not what. Yeah. Also Vassana, right? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. The benefits of open research are huge, right? I think it's something that we need to have. But then there's the aspect right now, trying to control it. And there's, in the industry itself, so I think that there's absolutely legitimate need, or a real need, for a legitimate 0 day market. It's a market where researchers should be able to sell their items to people who have, you know, a legitimate need for it. Legitimate, I guess, is perspective, right? Because if you're living in Iran, you're going to sell it to your government. But if I'm living in the U.S. and I sell it to Iran, that's not really great, you know. So I think that a market has to exist where there's a legitimate need, so that researchers can take all their hard work and actually get paid fair dollar value, sort of the way that they're doing now in some respects, but something that really guarantees them that their item is going to the right places, and that holds those who are using the items or purchasing those items at least somewhat accountable. So in the case of something like Hacking Team, when you find out that they're not really doing what they say they're doing, you can do something about it. No, we had a company in 2005, I think it was 2006, that bought an IE, whenever IE9 was, whenever that was, they bought a 0-day for IE9 off of us. It was about $110,000. And they bought it to demonstrate the effectiveness of one of their hypervisor type systems, the effectiveness and its ability to contain a breach and to really contain a breach within a specific, I guess I can't talk too much, but contain a breach within a specific area of the system. They were using it as a marketing tool. So we actually had some customers. A few customers that bought 0-days specifically for that purpose. They would buy them to either demonstrate the effectiveness of their technology. There are some 0-day companies right now that exist that make anti-0-day technology, execution prevention stuff, and they use that stuff. So there are those uses. Then, of course, there are other uses, that I never talk about, but there are other uses that are also legitimate or at least patriotic at some level, but they're definitely dual use. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. They will. So here's something that I actually thought about wassenaar. They will for people who are trying to abide by it. But people, of course, who are not, well, I mean, everybody knows you can't control the criminals. Something that I, as a broker, had a lot of concern with wassenaar was that one of the things that it says someplace in there, and you might know the language, it sounds like you might know the language better than I do. Something in there says that the US government will have the right to review the technology prior to its exportation. Something like that. Are you familiar with that? Yeah. We have not yet, no, and that's been interesting. So we actually had our legal team look at that, and we were clear. There were certain things that would have applied in an obscure way, but we weren't doing business in that way, and I don't remember what they were. No, yeah, we haven't encountered that with any of the items that we sold, and we are pretty careful. I don't remember what the outcome of it was. I can probably provide it to you later, but there was an interesting. Our lawyers got back and they actually gave us a really interesting view on the whole thing, and they said, "Well, you're effectively clear to do this," and it's because I think part of it is the laws right now as they're written. There are no laws about 0-days, so 0-days are software. So technically, we're selling software, and it's dual use. It's like selling Microsoft, right? It's like selling Microsoft operating system. Um, well, right. Yeah, it could. Yeah, I think there are definitely situations where you could cross that. I mean, especially if it's something involved with cryptography. you know, I think that there are certain points like that where you might hit legal issues. Um, but I was going to say something about Western, and I totally forgot where I was going with it. Great. So, anyways, let me see. Oh, okay. That was all right. That was quick. So if we have to wrap up, then do you guys have any questions for me about the market and how maybe deals go down and things like that? Because I'd like to answer some of those questions for people that have never had any insight into this. Sure. How much of it goes on where? Well, all the transactions that we do are open. Just everything's encrypted and very private, or that we did. I mean, we don't do anything anymore, but all the transactions that we did were very open, and we kept detailed logs of everything and so on and so forth. And then, yeah. It depends on who the customer is. So we have technically four, but really three different levels of service. We have something that we call the silver package, right? Which is your industry standard vetted vulnerability scan. I mean, run a scan, vet the results, produce the reports. You know, it's going to protect you as good as Target was protected. We have the gold standard, which is a research-driven penetration test that actually uses our vulnerability research and exploit development methodology, and it applies that towards penetration testing, but it's technical only. So there's no social, no physical. Then we have the platinum standard. Platinum is full on physical, social, wireless, the whole 9 yards. We will literally break into a building and walk out with a server. Then we have an unrestricted methodology, and we challenge everybody. If you think your network is safe, have us come in with our unrestricted methodology. If we don't successfully breach, you still get your report, you get everything, we don't charge you. We've never failed to compromise. I'm sure that they're used in the online advertising industry illegally. The customers that we were selling to, absolutely not. I mean, that would be more like the black market stuff, but that's like adware. I mean, that's not really the same kind of stuff that we were interested in dealing with. Sometimes I don't pay much attention to that myself because I'm too far detached from it, but I bet you the people on my recon team are digging into that quite a bit, but we don't. Because that's what the media says. The media tries to make it sound like this clandestine cloak and dagger kind of baloney, and really we're just selling software. And I've been trying to tell people this for the longest time. I'm like, look, we're selling software. The software leverages vulnerabilities that exist in technology. And we got into this, frankly, because the software vendors themselves didn't want to pay for it and they don't want to pay fair market value. The first time we ever tried to publish a piece of software was against a large software vendor, right? We approached them, we said, hey, we found 76 vulnerabilities in your technology. And this was for a C something 2 level system. I don't remember what it was. It was an old Linux or Unix system that existed. It ran on alpha processors. And when we approached them, we said, hey, you know, we've got these vulnerabilities and we want to give them to you so that you can fix these issues. And they said, oh, great, thanks. And we'll publish advisories and it'd be great. That's all we wanted. They came back with a threat from the DMCA. They came back claiming that we violated some kind of computer crime law. And we said, this is ridiculous. And then shortly after that, we said, well, you know, we have these other people that we know are ethical, or so we thought, that we could sell to and provide these tools to that will pay for them and actually, you know, reward us for this work. And so we started, you know, doing that more aggressively. Really, we've been doing this brokering since '99, but it got really busy in about 2006. That's why you need the framework. That's why That's why I need the framework, because if you have the right framework in place, then that at least the framework should say, I've done my due diligence, the due diligence that I have to do, and I provided you with this item, and now you are being trusted to do the right thing. And if you do not do the right thing with this, then the framework says that you will be held accountable because I've done my homework. But if I go and I sell to somebody knowing that they're going to use it to, you know, hack God knows what and cause damage, then I should probably be in trouble too, because that means that I'm doing something with knowledge. But I mean, it kind of goes under the same thing with computers, right? I mean, if I arm somebody with a computer knowing that they're going to cause damage, I should also be held accountable. So. I think what is intent is something percent of the law. So, you're welcome.